we should get the discussion going so we can have a break between films. I'd like to introduce Terry Montague and Ken Whitaker of the Alloy Orchestra. And Michael Phillips. Michael Phillips is joining us again this year.
And our third, Roger Miller, is out there waiting to soak you for all you're worth on CDs and T-shirts and DVDs and a Blu-ray.
Can you mention some of the titles they'll be?
The Blu-ray is Phantom of the Opera.
Right.
We have copies of Metropolis without our score, but then our score on a separate disc that you can play simultaneously. We have more DVDs of
about Wild and Weird shorts that we did a couple of years ago. Yeah. There's The Lost World. There's I think The General and Steamboat Bill Jr.
Manslaughter by Cecil B. DeMille.
There's quite a selection.
Yeah, it's a good lineup. Okay, well, I should begin with the inevitable question. Did you pick this film yourself, or was it a commission? And if you chose it, what attracted you to it?
Well, we do a lot of our choosing of films with the Telluride Film Festival. And they had decided this year, unusually, they wanted to replay a film that they had done previously. They had done this film 10 or 15 years ago with a different accompaniment. Terry and I had literally sat in the audience watching this amazing film unfold, and I think simultaneously thinking to ourselves, oh, damn, why wasn't this one ours? This one, it's so our type of film. So anyway, when they mentioned it, I immediately said, oh, that's great. And then I immediately said, but it's going to be very hard for us to get access to, being an MGM film. The studios have been reluctant to kind of let some of their silence out very well. But the directors of Telluride kind of talked me into working with this and seeing where we could go with it. And there's a new dawn at MGM and the Warner Brothers releasing, where they're really eager to put these things out. They have been so accommodating. So we're very excited now to have a new relationship with MGM Warner Brothers.
Well, that's very good to hear. Thank you.
Can I ask what if there's any sort of circus cliches you were trying to avoid as you created a score for Hugh Gets Slapped?
Not necessarily. Actually, we didn't even really discuss that. In some ways, we used some of the circus cliches. Our approach is usually we don't talk about too much, but we just kind of emote and play what comes out. And then if we think something is unusually inappropriate, then we take it out. So when we did the circus stuff, the circus is the campy, cliched stuff, and I think it needs that because everything else is so down. so we actually use the cliches, hopefully to our advantage.
I don't actually think our circus music is very clichéic. It's all original. It's not actually based on anything. We've avoided some of the songs you would associate with that, and so I think I don't know whether it's fresh and different, but at least it's not to the point of being cliche. And the one thing that's kind of cliched is the little penny whistle song at the end when the clowns are walking out, and that was, as you said, done almost intentionally to do something that was hit you over the head with. This is like a funny little clown song.
Well, that makes sense because so much of the music we would associate with circuses are for American circuses, and of course this is quite different kind of circus. It's European, it's set in Paris, so that makes perfect sense.
I did like the drunken conductor, though.
I'd like to read one thing. Although this film was a big critical success, was it not, Kristin, and also a big popular success for MGM. This was the first time I've ever seen this, and I wonder who else was the first timer this time here. All right. Two things struck me right off. I loved the kind of warm laugh Leo, the lion, got because everyone is thinking the same thing. This is your cue. This is your cue. Art for art's sake, and he didn't say anything.
I think he might have had a contract that prevented him from roaring more, specific number of times during the film.
He was taking the silent movie thing really seriously, I think.
This is from the critical response was very good in the main. This is from the Chicago Daily Tribune, 1924. If you're in the mood, if you're stepping out with your best beloved for a lightsome evening, He Who Gets Slapped is not the film for you to see, for it isn't a pleasant picture. And then at the end it goes on, Lon Chaney, as he, gives one of his usual faithful and gripping impersonations, but I didn't like the picture. It gave me the willies. It's from the play by Leonid Andreev, and I understand that it was downright weird. I like that. Now this was from a production. I think it probably got picked up, optioned after somebody saw the Theater Guild production in New York, which the Theater Guild was the producing entity that was doing a lot of the more experimental work, mostly a lot of it European and Russian, and a lot of the more the braver, kind of crazier American expressionist plays that were going on then. And it's astonishing to me that material, I mean, this is very simple material in one way, but it's such a rich actor showcase. And if you only know Chaney from those, not even the whole films or the entire performances, but from the snippets we see when he's truly in extremis all the time, the man, the Man of a Thousand Faces, the Phantom of the Opera, the unfortunately lost film London After Midnight, which you see stills from that, and it's just heartbreaking that we can't see it. But this is a very delicate performance, and Norma Shear is doing a very good naturalistic work, and that's what I'd love to hear what you had to say about the performances, guys, just because the music we heard tonight was robust and delicate at the same time.
It's always our effort not to overplay the scenes where the actors are shining through, not to really steal the limelight or shadow them in any way. But at the same time, this is a very twisted film, and it was necessary for us to get into the spirit of that a little bit and play up the characters. So.
Just some of the subtleties of when he is the clown, when he first runs into the room with the Baron and the Count, and he's just so clown. It's just awesome. Yet nothing good is going to come of this.
Not going to get that girl.
So there's a weird balance. I mean, a lot of people are freaked out by clowns anyway, but usually they disguise that with ultra happy. This is definitely not ultra happy, and the way he dances into the room is just so contrary and diabolical at the same time. Just fabulous. It's like my favorite little bit, and I'm so busy down there. It's like I make sure I have to get up and get ready because some of these things you miss when we're down here working, and that's a scene I have to see every time, and it gets me every time. It's like, oh, that's that moment. Yeah.
No, Victor Searstrom, the director, I'm murdering that pronunciation, but is it true, Kristin, that his work in Sweden especially, he was a pioneer in using locations, real life locations, and getting out of the sound stages and really capturing kind of what was out in the world. Now this is a different thing because we're talking about mostly interiors and, as you say, interiors that fit the studio style and made him a studio prospect. But I'd like to hear what you have to say just about the visual quality that leads you to rank him quite as highly as you do.
Well, I think his Swedish films are quite different from his Hollywood films. If you see something like The Outlaw and His Wife, that's set almost entirely outdoors and in the mountains. It was shot in Iceland, and it's quite extraordinary, the use of landscape. But the Swedish directors in general, Moritz Stiller and Georg Gothkircher as well, were known for using landscapes. It was partly because they didn't really have big studios, and they had wonderful landscapes, so they came up with stories that would exploit that. Yeah, he changes considerably when he's working in a studio system. You do get that very beautiful scene in the forest, which is shot very effectively with the dappled light and everything. And there's more, I think, in terms of exteriors in The Scarlet Letter and The Wind, but yeah, this film is quite different from the Swedish ones.
Should we go to questions from the audience?
Yeah, I think we probably should open it up and...
Let's do it. Who's got a question? Here come the mics. Right there. Yeah, right there. On the aisle.
Yes? The movie featured a lion as one of the characters, and it was the first MGM production, according to the notes. I was wondering if there was any connection with that, if the MGM lion was a character in the first MGM movie.
Well, the lion was already the symbol for the Goldwyn Company. And if you see Goldwyn pictures from, say, 1918, 19, they've already got Leo the lion. So I think it's probably just a coincidence.
You know, I noticed just tonight for the first time that the last credit after the end of the film says a Metro Goldwyn production, but doesn't mention M.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that is. Mayer may have been the smallest of the three companies coming together, but he certainly, I mean, Louis Mayer became, of course, the head of the studio eventually, and he was very important. So I'm not quite sure. I don't think they called themselves MGM at that point. So they probably were sort of fine-tuning the name.
Who else? The other hands here. Okay, great.
Hello, I just had a quick question for the musicians. One of the most important parts of composition is, of course, rests and space between the notes. I'm curious what you guys, the lack of background noise and how that affects composition for silent film as opposed to when you do have background noise and something like museum hours where you can hear the shuffling and all that. So how the lack of the background noise affects when you can use rest and when you need to have that constant motion underneath.
I didn't hear absolutely everything, but I think I got enough. One of the things we actually do talk about in these things is how much we're going to do sound effects and the actual sounds that you're seeing in the film, and how much we're going to just be the orchestra playing an underlying theme. We feel we've gone too far in the direction of sound effects and music that is so specific to the scene that it can take you out of the mood, the reverie you have when you're watching these films. At the same time, when somebody in a comedy gets hit over the head with a giant hammer, there's a noise, and that noise really needs to be expressed by the orchestra. So we go back and forth, and we do in fact say, that's one that's really got to be done, or that one is such a delicate scene, putting in a sound effect there can destroy the mood. So anyway, we don't have a rule to it, but we feel our way through these things.
We feel like our responsibility is sort of threefold. Well, one, we're the underscoring of the picture. Two, the sound effects. I think for modern audiences, there's certain sound effects that people expect to hear, at least we expect to hear. And then because it's a silent film, there's that whole dialogue, which is so important in the talkies, that we feel like we have to make up for that to a certain degree. So we're always riding that line between, which of those is most important at the time, and how do we make that balance, and how do we keep it smooth and seamless. And what we always say is we're not trying to go back in time to where the picture was made. We're trying to bridge the gap between when it was made to how it stands alone now as this fabulous piece of art. So it's a delicate balance, but usually with the three people, you can get a pretty good idea of, are we on the same page? And then if we think it works, then we just go with that.
Who else?
Our next question will come slightly to your right.
Okay.
I just like the music, and I'd like to say that it's infused with the ecstatic kind of ecstasy. Love the when the clown is just as the Lon Cherry character is just kind of looking over his chalice, looking over his the heart on his chest. It's just kind of somber, and the music is very melancholy. I admire you guys a lot. Very amusing music, very melancholy. And very
we're having a hard time hearing up here. Can you have the microphone shoved right into his gaping maw there?
It's just kind of infused with kind of ecstasy.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Did anybody?
I just really admire the music that the orchestra performs here at the Telluride Film Festival.
I'm just trying to get you to say that over and over again.
Well, thank you very much. The scenes where he's with he is with Consuela, I mean, that's such a delicate thing, because he is so tortured and he is so in love, and he is so in love from afar, and especially when later on when she slaps him jokingly, what a subtle scene, but his face it's just like he feels that pain of his whole life of being slapped from the one he really loves, and then he has to laugh it off. So there's a lot of really delicate stuff there with that. So again, like with all our scenes, we try to match up the emotion of what we see into what we play, and hopefully that gets you right there in the sewn-on heart.
Who else?
We have one
Great.
on the aisle.
Are there historical accounts of the scores used in movies such as this, or the orchestration, the array of instruments that are used? And if so, do you try to mimic that or match that in your own orchestration? And secondly, does anybody know if this film ever was screened here at the Virginia? It was released in 1924. The theater was opened in 1921.
I can't answer the last one. I don't know if any of us can.
Probably a good chance of it.
We'll try to find out by the time Do the Right Thing comes along. I'll let you know.
But as far as, there was so much experimentation both in the making of these films and in the music, and everybody was trying to figure out how we can match up music with these films and make money. So the bigger budget films, and D.W. Griffith would insist that his films were only showed with his orchestra and with that score that was specific to that film, but you know, that's really expensive, and that's not likely to happen as it trickles down. So there were so many different ways of people trying to add music with phonograph records, but that didn't quite work because things were hand cranked, and so the speeds were off. If you did have a score, then again, it might show in New York and Chicago and LA, but then when you got to the smaller towns, it was just the organist or the piano player or whoever they had playing whatever they wanted. So there were a lot of different things, such as sheet music. They would send around a piece of sheet music with a film and say, play this a number of times, and then people will go out and buy that tomorrow. Sort of like the CD soundtrack available kind of thing. There were also a lot of fake books, like piano players use fake books, where there's whole sections of love scenes where you can just flip to a love scene, you could flip to a chase scene, you could flip to a villainous scene. So there was all kinds of different ones. We don't go back to look at what was done for any particular film. It's fun to listen to them after the fact, after we scored them, but we don't want to be influenced. We just want to do what we feel is appropriate.
Our next question comes to the floor, slightly to your right.
Yes, a number of us were wondering whether that unusual sound you played 3 or 4 times during the course of the movie was a theremin, and if it wasn't, what was it?
That was my musical saw. It's a musical saw. It's actually a Stradivarius. They stamped it right on there. It played with a violin bow. It's known as the poor man's theremin to a certain degree. It's I like it better because one, I know how to play it, and you can get different harmonics. And with the scene where he gets thrown out of the room by the Count and the Baron, it's really uncomfortable. And then you get that, you know, when the circus ball is spinning with the clown, then it becomes sort of eerie. And yeah, that's my musical saw. It's my favorite thing to do.
We have a question in the aisle, slightly to your left, almost to the back of the house.
Hello. You touched on this earlier about how it was kind of, the clown was kind of creepy in the movie, was a little creepy to people today. I was wondering, because clowns used to be very popular figures, if you had any sense of how, in that earlier review, it was regarded as kind of a dark, weird picture. Was this, do you think that had an effect on the way the film was received, that clowns were more popular then than they are now?
Well, certainly Lon Chaney made another clown film Laugh Clown Laugh, which I think is about 1926. So obviously people liked him in that particular role. There was a whole genre of circus films in Europe, so the Scandinavians were especially used to making them, and they were often quite melodramatic and involved jealousy and revenge as well. So yeah, this it seems to have had a rather dark quality to it in many of the circus films that I've seen from the period, but I'm not sure it became more popular. It's been speculated that Charles Chaplin was quite influenced by this film when he made The Circus in 1927, which is his big circus film, and slight similarities with him being a sort of poor clown-like figure, falling in love with a bareback rider, and she's in love with a strong man, and so it ends unhappily, of course.
I mean, see, this is a massive generalization, but it seems like people happily accept all kinds of fervent, impassioned melodrama with this sort of setting in opera, and they certainly were not adverse to it in the silent era. I don't know how audiences of what the equivalents are in the early 21st century. I mean, the heartbreaker is that the Murnau film Four Devils, which is lost now, had a similar setting. This was Janet Gaynor, and I forget who else was in it. But I mean, there were reports at the time in 1928 that said this is the finest film I've ever seen, just for the technical leaps forward, and the setting was irresistible, and it still is. I think actors adore it because you're dealing with you're inherently dealing with two faces: what's happening backstage and what's happening on stage, what's happening in your heart and what's happening in performance. And when you see what Chaney, especially, who was born to do this sort of thing, can do with it, and also working with other actors who really just play it absolutely for keeps, for real. And it doesn't have. You see a film like this, and if you're new to this sort of really high grade silent film, you're kind of amazed at the honesty of the playing. I guess that's the only way to put it. And I think that's why audiences responded. Maybe that's why it brings out the best in excellent musicians too, and composers.
The last question will come from here, down slightly to your right.
I don't know much about this director, but we learned a lot, I think, today. But I just wonder if he was an influence on other Swedish directors, because during that funeral procession in the ring, I suddenly thought of The Seventh Seal, and I just wonder if he was an influence on people like Ingmar Bergman a lot.
He was a huge influence on Bergman, yes. Bergman knew his films well, and he, in fact, of course, cast Seaström in the lead role in in Seaström's last film, Wild Strawberries. So a lot of you have probably seen him in that role, much older than he was at this point. But yes, Bergman, absolutely. And Seaström's films well, certainly The Outlaw and His Wife was a huge influence in France. I mean, people were bowled over by it. Came out right after the war in France, and it was written about a great deal. And yes, Seaström was definitely a very influential figure.
I would say he's also very influential on us in our career. The second film we ever scored, which is now 22 years ago, was The Wind. We had done Metropolis. We just loved the whole concept of scoring silent films, and we just went to the video store and started pulling stuff off the shelf. And you know, I hate to say this, but when you watch just random silent films, a lot of them really aren't that interesting. And when we got to The Wind, we were just, well, I hate to say it,
Blown away.
And we immediately just launched into doing a score for it. And then we did a couple of performances, and at that time, MGM basically took it away from us. So.
Yeah, well, I hope you'd consider doing some of his big Swedish films at some point.
Well, in fact, I tried to get the commission to do The Outlaw and His Wife for the Italian Pordenone Silent Film Festival. They asked us to do The Phantom Chariot, which I have never found quite as effective. I don't know, I should probably watch it again.
Yeah, it does take several viewings, I think, to really, it's a very complicated film.
But The Outlaw and His Wife really was very, made a great impact on me, but they'd already commissioned somebody to do it. So.
Too bad. Okay, maybe one last question at this point? No? Okay, well,
I think they wrapped it.
yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.